Thank the gentleman from South Carolina for his patience, and I recognize him for I've started to say 20 minutes. That would be a good payoff, wouldn't it, for 5 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just scared everyone when you said 20 minutes. General Thornburg, I want to thank you for your service to our country, particularly in the field of law enforcement. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, I'm going to ask you a series of I hope, short, precise questions in hopes of kind of a fill-in-the-blank answer, because I want to ask you some longer ones later. What's our annual deficit?
$1.5 trillion right now.
What's our cumulative debt?
Roughly $14.5 trillion.
Are there any spending outlays that are not on the books? Are there any unfunded liabilities?
There's nothing that's genuinely off the books in the federal budget. The definition of an unfunded liability is a bit slipperier. I don't think it's actually appropriate in the federal context. But.
Well, let me ask you this. In present day dollars, what do we owe our seniors in terms of Medicare?
The truth is, conventional estimates are something like, $60 trillion, but the reality is that assumes that at some point you have a miracle in the future and Medicare grows more slowly. An honest calculation never converges. It's infinitely large. Infinitely large?
Yep. So the computers can't even figure out how far we will be in debt?
In the absence of some change that we have not yet seen, yeah.
All right. When I look at a pie chart of the budget for this year or last year, if you zeroed out the Department of Defense, would you balance the books?
No.
If you zeroed out all discretionary spending, would you balance the books?
No.
I think you testified that the wars cost $1 trillion?
The Iraq war had cumulatively cost about $1 trillion as of about a year ago.
So laying aside the any cost-benefit analysis of actually thwarting any attacks on our land since 9/11, our cumulative debt would only be $14 trillion if we had not had the war, right?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Marino, my colleague, and I were prosecutors in a former life, so we didn't follow politics and economics perhaps as obviously as closely as somebody as learned as you did. The 111th Congress, the budget that they passed, was it balanced?
Not
the 112th, the 111th.
111th, no.
Actually, I don't think they passed a budget, but let's give them.
There was not a budget resolution.
Assuming arguendo, was there any discussion of actually balancing that budget?
Not to my knowledge.
The budget proposed by the president, was it balanced?
No.
The budget not proposed nor voted on by the Senate, is there any discussion of it being balanced?
No.
In the 1990s, the glory days, when a Republican Congress forced President Clinton to have a balanced budget and generated a surplus, was that money used to pay down the debt?
During the periods of surplus, we reduced federal debt outstanding.
We paid down the debt.
Yeah.
How much? How far did we get it down?
I don't know. Phil might know.
Probably in the neighborhood of $500 or $600 billion over 4 years of surpluses, I would say.
That's billion with a B?
That's correct.
In the past 50 years, how many surpluses have we had?
Five.
Five.
I think. Well, I'll give you a sixth if you can find it.
Okay.
We have a constitutional amendment that provides for the generation of revenue, but yet you argue we should not have one for capping spending. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think you should have a balanced budget amendment that takes any of the tools to reduce the debt off the table. That would be my position.
We do have a constitutional amendment that provides for revenue production, correct?
If you're talking about the amendment that allowed for the income tax?
That one.
That's correct, yes.
We have two that relate to alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we have one that even limits congressional salaries and how they can be impacted.
Yes.
And in 50 years, we have managed to produce a surplus either 5 or 6 times, and you think we have the self-restraint to balance our budget?
I didn't say I think you have the self-restraint to balance your budget. I said that the restraint is not going to be provided by amending the Constitution. You have demonstrated the restraint to reduce the federal deficit at times when there was a consensus around doing that. That's what happened in the 1990s.
We also were $15 trillion in debt. Agreed?
That would be the gross debt, yes. Is $15 trillion.
Mr. Chairman, could I have an additional 30 seconds to ask?
Without objection.
Dr. Holt, so you can, two more questions. If we were to take our colleagues on the other side of the aisle up on their idea of punishing people who had the unmitigated temerity to be successful, let's tax the billionaires at, say, 50%. Will that solve our fiscal woes?
No.
Let's say that we took them up on their idea to do away with the subsidies for so-called big oil, and while we're at it, let's do away with the subsidies for the entire green industry as well. Will that balance the budget?
No.
What about those dreadful corporate jet owners? If we just did away with that, would that balance the budget?
No.
Can you balance the budget without taking on entitlements?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.